I thought my life couldn't get any worse until that metal ladle cracked against my skull. Blood trickled down my forehead as Crystal, my daughter-in-law, screamed those words that would change everything. "Who cooks like that, you useless woman?" My son Marcus just turned up the television volume, pretending the assault on his mother never happened. But as I touched the throbbing lump on my head, something caught my eye behind the stove. A tiny red light blinked steadily from the forgotten nanny camera I'd installed months ago. Crystal's violent outburst had been recorded. Everything. After 30 years of keeping peace at any cost, I finally had proof. My name is Sonia, and at 65 years old, I never imagined I'd be standing in my own kitchen with blood on my hands from my own family's cruelty. This house in suburban Denver had been Frank's pride and joy before he passed 5 years ago. We'd raised Marcus here, watched him graduate college, cheered at his wedding. When he lost his sales job 3 years back and asked to move home temporarily with his pregnant wife, I welcomed them with open arms. That was my first mistake. Crystal was 28, then petite with bottle blonde hair and a smile that could charm anyone except me when we were alone. She quit her restaurant job the day after moving in, claiming pregnancy complications that no doctor ever confirmed. I gave up the master bedroom Frank and I had shared for 30 years, moving my belongings down to the converted basement apartment. The adjustment felt natural then. I wanted to help my son's growing family succeed. Within months, Crystal had redecorated every room upstairs using money from Frank's pension. Gone were the family photos replaced with abstract art that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She threw away Frank's favorite recliner, calling it disgusting old man furniture. When I protested quietly, Marcus sided with his wife. "Mom, Crystal's just trying to make the place feel like home," he'd say, avoiding eye contact. Home, as if the house where I'd lived for 35 years wasn't already home. The daily routine became my prison. I cooked breakfast, lunch, and dinner for 4 people. I cleaned bathrooms, did laundry, grocery shopping, and childcare for little Emma, now 2 years old. Crystal spent her days watching television, getting her nails done, or meeting friends for expensive lunches that appeared on my credit card statements. Every meal I prepared drew criticism. "This chicken is dry as cardboard, Sonia." "Who taught you to season vegetables? A caveman." "Emma won't eat this garbage. Make her something else." Crystal had a gift for making me feel incompetent in my own kitchen cooking recipes I'd perfected over decades. The housekeeping never satisfied her either. "There's dust on the ceiling fan blades. The bathroom mirror has water spots. This floor feels sticky under my feet." No matter how thoroughly I cleaned, she found flaws and made sure everyone heard about them. My appearance became another target. "Those jeans went out of style 20 years ago. Your gray roots are showing again. That lipstick color makes you look dead." Coming from a woman who hadn't worked a single day since moving into my home, these insults stung deeply. Marcus witnessed every cruel comment and said nothing. Sometimes he'd actually laugh along with Crystal's jokes about my cooking or cleaning. My own son, the baby I'd nursed through pneumonia, the child I'd driven to every baseball practice and school play, now treated me like hired help who couldn't be fired. The neighbors started noticing. Martha Henderson, who lived next door, would give me concerned looks when she saw me taking out trash with bruises on my arms from Crystal's accidental bumps and shoves. Bill Henderson asked once if everything was okay at home. I smiled and lied, protecting the family peace as I'd been taught. My social life disappeared gradually. Crystal needed babysitting during my church group meetings. She scheduled doctor appointments during book club gatherings. When my volunteer shift at the library conflicted with her salon appointments, I had to cancel. Slowly, I became isolated from every friendship and activity that brought joy to my life. The Sunday when everything changed started like any other. I was preparing chicken vegetable soup using Frank's mother's recipe, the one that had comforted our family through illnesses and celebrations for generations. The vegetables simmered gently while I added herbs and seasonings with the careful touch that comes from decades of practice. Crystal stormed into the kitchen like a tornado, her face twisted with rage. "What is that smell? Are you burning something again?" "Just making soup for dinner," I replied calmly, continuing to stir. "Let me see that." She grabbed the wooden spoon from my hand, tasted the broth, and made a disgusted face. "This is flavorless mush. You're ruining perfectly good ingredients. Who taught you to cook seriously?" I suggested maybe she could prepare dinner if my cooking didn't meet her standards. The words slipped out before I could stop them, a moment of backbone that I immediately regretted. Crystal's eyes blazed with fury. "Don't get smart with me, you useless old woman." She grabbed the metal ladle from the counter and swung it hard against the side of my head. The impact sent stars across my vision and pain shooting down my neck. "Marcus," I called out, stumbling backward as blood began trickling from the wound. The television volume increased immediately. My son had heard his wife assault his mother and chose to drown out my pain rather than defend me. Crystal threw the ladle into the sink with a clatter that seemed to echo through my soul. "Clean up this mess and do it right this time." She stomped out of the kitchen, leaving me alone with my shame and physical pain. I pressed a dish towel against the bleeding wound, tears mixing with blood as they fell onto my apron. 30 years of marriage to Frank had never included a single moment of violence. Now I lived in fear of my own family in the home where I'd once felt safest. But as I reached for ice from the freezer, something caught my attention. Behind the stove, tucked between the appliance and the wall, a small red light blinked steadily. The nanny camera I'd installed months ago to monitor Emma during babysitting sessions. I'd completely forgotten about it after setting it up. For the first time in 3 years, I smiled through my tears. Crystal's violent assault had been recorded in high definition, and she had no idea the evidence existed. I sat at my small basement desk that night, ice pack pressed against my throbbing head, staring at the laptop screen that would change my life forever. The nanny camera had captured everything: Crystal's verbal abuse, the violent strike with the ladle, my cry for help, and Marcus turning up the television to ignore his mother's assault. But as I scrolled through weeks of recorded footage, I discovered this was just the tip of an iceberg that chilled me to the bone. 3 months of stored video revealed a pattern of systematic cruelty I'd been too close to see clearly. There was Crystal rifling through my purse, stealing cash while I showered. Multiple recordings showed her opening my mail, throwing away medical appointment reminders and Social Security notifications. She'd been coaching little Emma to call me mean grandma instead of just grandma. The most devastating footage showed Marcus and Crystal laughing together about my expense. "The old bat pays for everything and thinks we're grateful," Crystal said, counting bills she'd taken from my wallet. "She's so pathetic, cooking and cleaning like our personal servant." Marcus actually laughed. "She won't live forever. This house will be ours soon enough." My own son discussing my death like a business opportunity. I pulled out the journal I'd been keeping, sporadically recording incidents that seemed important at the time. Reading back through 2 years of entries, I saw how Crystal had systematically isolated me from everything that brought meaning to my life. March 15th. Crystal needed babysitting during Pastor William's retirement dinner. Missed saying goodbye to man who married Frank and me. June 3rd, Crystal scheduled dentist appointment during book club meeting. 3rd meeting missed this year. August 20th. Crystal said my volunteer shift at library was selfish since Emma needed grandmother time. Had to resign from position I loved. Page after page documented the gradual erosion of my independence and dignity. I decided to investigate my finances more thoroughly. Opening online banking for the first time in months, I discovered hundreds of unauthorized transactions. Crystal had been using my debit card for expensive shopping sprees, salon treatments, and dinners at restaurants that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Credit card statements showed charges I'd never authorized: a $2,000 handbag, weekly spa treatments, premium gasoline for Crystal's leased BMW that was somehow linked to my account. Marcus had apparently forged my signature on the lease agreement. The most shocking discovery came when I called my mortgage company to check payment status. My house, completely paid off when Frank died, had been refinanced twice without my knowledge. Someone had drained $60,000 in equity, leaving me with monthly payments I couldn't afford on my pension and part-time library salary that Crystal had forced me to quit. The next morning, Martha Henderson knocked on my door with homemade coffee cake and worried eyes. We sat in my basement apartment because Crystal had banned me from entertaining guests upstairs. "Sonia, honey, I need to tell you something that's been eating at me," Martha said, gripping her coffee cup tightly. "My daughter works at First National Bank. She mentioned some unusual activity on your accounts." I encouraged her to continue, though my stomach was already knotting with dread. Large cash withdrawals, new credit cards, opened loan applications. She wasn't supposed to tell me, but she's worried about you, also. Martha hesitated. "I was at the grocery store last Tuesday when Crystal tried to use food stamps with your name on them. The clerk said the application claimed you were mentally incapacitated." Food stamps. Crystal had applied for government assistance in my name, claiming I was mentally unfit to handle my own affairs. "There's more," Martha continued gently. "Crystal's been telling people in the neighborhood that you're developing dementia. She says you forget things, get confused about money, and sometimes don't recognize Emma. Several neighbors have asked me if it's true. The pieces click together like a horrifying puzzle. Crystal wasn't just stealing my money and dignity. She was building a public narrative that I was mentally incompetent, laying groundwork to have me declared unfit and take complete control of my assets. "Martha, I need to ask you something in complete confidence," I said, my voice steadier than I'd felt in years. "If someone was systematically stealing from an elderly person and planning to have them committed based on lies, what would you advise them to do?" Martha's eyes filled with understanding and determination. "I'd tell them to document everything, get legal help immediately, and know they deserve so much better than what they're getting. I'd also tell them they have friends who care and want to help." That afternoon, I walked to the public library where I used to volunteer. Using the computer lab, I researched elder abuse laws in Colorado, financial fraud statutes, and legal aid services. I learned that what Crystal and Marcus were doing wasn't just morally wrong, it was criminally prosecutable. I opened a new bank account at a different branch across town using my maiden name and social security number. The next pension deposit would be redirected there beyond Crystal's reach. Most importantly, I made an appointment with Harold Peterson, Frank's longtime lawyer, who'd handled our wills and estate planning. Harold had known our family for 20 years and would understand the gravity of what was happening. As I walked home from the library, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 3 years: hope. Not the passive hope that things would improve on their own, but active hope backed by plans and determination. Crystal was in the kitchen when I returned, criticizing the soup I'd left simmering. "This tastes like dishwater, Sonia. Emma won't eat it." "I'm sorry," I replied meekly, letting her think nothing had changed. "I'll make something else for her." But everything had changed. While Crystal saw the same broken woman she'd been tormenting for 3 years, I was now gathering evidence and building a case that would expose every cruel thing she'd done to me. The nanny camera behind the stove continued recording, and I began planning where to install additional cameras throughout the house. If Crystal wanted to play games with a supposedly senile old woman, I'd give her a performance she'd never forget. The victim phase of my life was ending. The justice phase was about to begin. Harold Peterson's law office smelled like leather and old books' familiar scents that reminded me of Frank's study. At 72, Harold had represented our family through house purchases, will preparations, and business contracts. His shocked expression when I showed him the video evidence told me everything I needed to know about how seriously he took my situation. "Sonia, what I'm seeing here constitutes multiple felonies," he said, rewinding the footage of Crystal striking me with the ladle. "Elder abuse, fraud, forgery, potentially conspiracy. We need to document everything systematically before we act." I opened my notebook and shared every detail I'd discovered: the unauthorized bank withdrawals, forged signatures, stolen mail, false dementia claims, and financial identity theft. Harold's assistant Linda typed furiously while shaking her head in disgust. "Here's what we're going to do," Harold explained. "First, we protect your remaining assets immediately. I'm setting up an irrevocable trust that Crystal and Marcus cannot access or challenge. Second, we gather evidence systematically. Third, when we have an airtight case, we spring the trap all at once." He handed me a tiny digital recorder disguised as a pen. "Colorado is a one-party consent state for recording conversations. Document everything, but don't let them know you're building a case. Can you maintain that performance?" I thought about 30 years of keeping peace, swallowing pride, and protecting family harmony at my own expense. I've been performing for 3 years already. Now I'm just changing the script. Back home, I began the most important acting job of my life. When Crystal criticized my housework, I apologized and cleaned again. When she insulted my appearance, I thanked her for caring enough to notice. When she took money from my purse, I pretended not to see. But while maintaining my facade of helpless compliance, I was systematically documenting every crime. I installed 3 additional cameras, one in the living room, where Crystal often bragged on phone calls, one in the hallway, where she searched through my mail, and one in the kitchen where most verbal abuse occurred. The cameras were tiny battery-powered devices that recorded to cloud storage Harold's tech consultant set up for me. The recording pen captured conversations with devastating clarity. Crystal talking to her friend about how stupid I was for paying all the bills. Marcus discussing with his boss how he planned to sell the house once his senile mother was institutionalized. Crystal coaching Emma to tell preschool teachers that grandma forgets things and acts weird. I learned to ask innocent questions that prompted them to reveal their plans. "Crystal dear, what will happen to this house when I'm too old to live alone?" She'd launch into detailed explanations of how memory care facilities worked and how much money they'd save by selling my property. "Marcus, honey, what would you do if I couldn't manage my finances anymore?" He'd actually outline the legal steps for having me declared incompetent, apparently having researched the process thoroughly. Every cruel conversation was documented. Every theft was recorded. Every lie about my mental state was captured in high-definition video. Meanwhile, I was quietly rebuilding my support network. I reconnected with Patricia from church, explaining I'd been dealing with family challenges, but was ready to rejoin activities. Patricia immediately invited me to resume volunteering at the food bank. "We've missed you terribly, Sonia," she said over coffee at the church fellowship hall. "Several people asked about you. We were worried something was wrong at home." I carefully shared selected details about feeling isolated and undervalued, without revealing the full scope of abuse. Patricia's response was immediate and supportive. "You're always welcome here, and if you ever need anything at all, please call me. Family should lift you up, not tear you down." I also contacted Frank's nephew Timothy in California, Frank's closest living relative besides Marcus. Timothy remembered me fondly from family gatherings and was shocked to hear about my circumstances. Aunt Sonia, Uncle Frank would be furious if he knew how Marcus was treating you, Timothy said during our phone call. That house legally belongs to you, and nobody has the right to make you feel unwelcome there. What can I do to help? Timothy was a successful contractor with a stable marriage and no children. He'd always regretted living so far from family and immediately offered to fly to Denver if I needed support. I might take you up on that soon, I told him, not yet revealing the full extent of my legal preparations. The most heartbreaking aspect of evidence gathering involved documenting Crystal's treatment of Emma. The 2-year-old was displaying signs of stress that concerned me deeply: regression in potty training, increased crying, fearfulness around Crystal when she was angry. I recorded Crystal leaving Emma alone in the house while she went shopping for hours, a dangerous practice that qualified as child neglect. I documented her screaming at Emma for normal toddler behavior, like spilling juice or crying when tired. "Stop being such a baby," Crystal would yell at a 2-year-old who was literally a baby. "Your stupid crying is giving me a headache." One recording captured Crystal slapping Emma's hands hard enough to leave marks because the child had touched Crystal's phone. Emma's terrified sobbing broke my heart, but I forced myself to document everything for the legal case. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, Emma's pediatrician, had been expressing concerns about the child's behavioral changes during recent visits. Crystal always dismissed the doctor's questions, claiming Emma was just going through a phase. I made a confidential appointment to discuss my observations. "Mrs. Henderson, what you're describing sounds like a child experiencing chronic stress in her home environment," Dr. Mitchell said after reviewing my documented concerns. "This level of behavioral regression in a previously happy child is concerning. I'm required to file a report with Child Protective Services." Everything was falling into place exactly as Harold had predicted. The evidence was overwhelming. The legal framework was solid and the support network was strong. But Crystal had no idea her victim was building the case that would destroy her completely. 2 weeks into my evidence-gathering phase, I overheard a conversation that accelerated my timeline dramatically. Crystal was on the phone with someone named Devin, speaking in hushed tones, while she thought I was napping in the basement. "She's asking too many questions about bank accounts lately," Crystal said. "I think we need to move faster on the commitment process. How quickly can you get the psychological evaluation arranged?" My blood turned to ice. Devin was apparently a contact who could arrange fraudulent psychiatric evaluations to have elderly people declared incompetent. Crystal wasn't just planning my financial ruin, she was planning to have me locked away in a facility where I'd be powerless to fight back. "Next weekend would be perfect," Crystal continued. "I'm having a dinner party with her family and friends. If she has some kind of breakdown in front of witnesses, it'll support our case that she's mentally unstable." A dinner party where Crystal planned to publicly humiliate me, then use my supposed breakdown as evidence for involuntary psychiatric commitment. I smiled in the darkness of my basement apartment. Crystal had just handed me the perfect opportunity to spring my trap in front of a room full of witnesses. The performance of my lifetime was about to begin. Harold Peterson's conference room hummed with quiet efficiency as we finalized the legal strategy that would bring Crystal and Marcus to justice. Linda had prepared 3 thick folders of evidence: financial fraud, elder abuse, and child endangerment. The 4th folder contained the criminal complaints that would be filed simultaneously with multiple agencies. "The timing has to be perfect," Harold explained, adjusting his reading glasses. "We serve the legal papers, execute the asset protection orders, and initiate criminal proceedings all within the same hour. Once they realize what's happening, they'll try to destroy evidence and flee." Timothy had flown in from California the night before, staying at a downtown hotel to avoid detection. At 45, he looked remarkably like Frank had at that age, with the same gentle eyes and determined jawline. Seeing him in Harold's office brought tears to my eyes. "Aunt Sonia, I can't believe Marcus is treating you this way," Timothy said, reviewing the video evidence. "Uncle Frank talked about you constantly after he retired. He was so proud of how you took care of everyone, how you made that house a home. This is not what he would have wanted for you." Timothy's wife Jennifer had accompanied him, bringing their expertise as a licensed social worker who specialized in family crisis intervention. She reviewed the documentation about Emma's welfare with professional concern. "This child is in immediate danger," Jennifer concluded. The psychological damage from witnessing domestic violence combined with direct neglect and emotional abuse requires emergency intervention. I'm prepared to serve as emergency guardian if needed. Detective Sarah Chen from the Denver Police Department's Elder Abuse Task Force had reviewed our evidence and confirmed that criminal charges were warranted. She would be standing by during the dinner party to make arrests if Crystal and Marcus attempted to flee or destroy evidence. "What Mrs. Crystal Williams has done constitutes a pattern of systematic exploitation that we see in organized elder abuse schemes," Detective Chen explained. "The fact that she's been researching involuntary commitment procedures suggests this was a long-term plan to permanently control your assets." Adult Protective Services had opened an investigation based on my confidential report. Caseworker Michael Torres would conduct a surprise inspection during the dinner party, providing official documentation of the unsafe living conditions Crystal had created for both me and Emma. "Mrs. Henderson, what you've documented here represents one of the most comprehensive elder abuse cases I've seen," Michael said. "The combination of physical violence, financial exploitation, and psychological manipulation creates a clear picture of intentional victimization. But the most satisfying aspect of our plan involved Crystal's own dinner party becoming the stage for her public exposure. Crystal had invited 12 people: her parents Robert and Diana Williams, her successful sister Sharon Marcus's boss, Jim Morrison, neighbors Bill and Martha Henderson, my church friend Patricia Crystal's former co-worker, Lisa Marcus's college friend, Dave, Crystal's cousin Melissa, and 2 couples from their social circle. She'd also arranged for someone from Sunset Manor Memory Care to attend ostensibly to discuss their services, but actually to witness my supposed breakdown that would justify immediate commitment. What Crystal didn't know was that each guest would receive a USB drive containing video evidence of her crimes. Timothy would arrive as a surprise guest, accompanied by Jennifer and Harold Peterson as family friends who wanted to meet Marcus's wife. The menu Crystal had planned was elaborate appetizers, 3 courses, wine pairings, and dessert. She intended to showcase my incompetence by having me help serve, then publicly criticizing everything I did wrong in front of the witnesses. "It's perfect," she'd told Marcus, not knowing I was recording from the next room. "Everyone will see how confused and useless she's become. When she has her little meltdown, Dr. Richardson from Sunset Manor will be there to suggest immediate evaluation." I spent the week before the party making final preparations that Crystal interpreted as helpful cooperation. She had no idea I was coordinating with law enforcement, legal counsel, and protective services to turn her manipulation into her downfall. The laboratory results had come back confirming traces of prescription sleep medication in my hair samples. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a toxicologist Harold had consulted, confirmed that the levels indicated regular dosing over several months. "This explains the fatigue and confusion symptoms that Mrs. Williams has been publicizing as evidence of dementia," Dr. Walsh explained. "Someone has been systematically drugging Mrs. Henderson with stolen medication, probably added to her food or beverages. Crystal had been stealing sleeping pills from Martha Henderson's medicine cabinet during neighborhood gatherings, then slipping them into my meals to create the very symptoms she cited as proof of my mental decline. The FBI Financial Crimes Task Force had become interested in our case when Detective Chen shared evidence that Crystal's exploitation methods matched patterns from 3 other states. She was apparently part of a larger network that targeted vulnerable elderly women through their adult children. We believe Mrs. Williams may have been involved in similar schemes in Arizona, Florida, and Texas, Agent Patricia Williams explained. In each case, a young woman married into a family with elderly parents who owned valuable property, then systematically isolated and exploited them. The investigation had expanded far beyond my personal case into a federal inquiry about organized elder abuse networks. 2 days before the party, I made final arrangements for Emma's safety. Patricia had volunteered to babysit Emma at her house during the dinner, removing the child from what would likely become a chaotic scene when Crystal's crimes were exposed. "That sweet baby doesn't need to see her mother arrested," Patricia said, packing special toys and snacks for Emma's overnight stay. "She'll be safe and loved while justice is served." I also completed my will revisions, ensuring that Timothy and Jennifer would inherit the house and remaining assets if something happened to me. Marcus had forfeited any claim to his inheritance through his criminal behavior. "This breaks my heart, but it's necessary," I told Harold while signing the documents. "I raised him better than this. Frank would be ashamed of what his son has become." The night before the party, I sat in my basement apartment reviewing 3 years of accumulated evidence. Video recordings of violence and theft, audio files of cruel conversations, financial records documenting systematic fraud, medical reports confirming deliberate poisoning. Crystal had spent years believing she was outsmarting a naive old woman who was too weak and confused to fight back. Tomorrow night, she would discover that the woman she'd been tormenting had been building an airtight legal case against her. I thought about Frank, wondering what he would think about the elaborate revenge I'd orchestrated. He'd always said justice delayed was not justice denied, just justice served at the right temperature. Tomorrow's dinner would be served very cold indeed. Crystal had planned a party to celebrate my destruction. Instead, it would become the venue for her complete downfall, witnessed by everyone she'd tried to impress with her cruel dominance over a helpless elderly woman. The trap was set, the evidence was overwhelming, and justice was finally within reach. Saturday morning arrived crisp and clear, Colorado sunshine streaming through the kitchen windows as I prepared for the most important performance of my life. Crystal bustled around the house like a general preparing for battle, completely unaware that she was actually arranging her own surrender. "Sonia, I need you to polish the good silverware and set the dining room table for 14, she commanded, checking items off her detailed list. "And remember, when you're serving tonight, try not to embarrass us. Walk carefully, speak quietly, and don't interrupt when adults are talking." "Of course, dear," I replied meekly, hiding my smile behind a mask of submissive compliance. "I want everything to be perfect for your guests." Crystal had spent Frank's money on expensive wine, organic vegetables, and premium steaks for her showcase dinner. The irony wasn't lost on me that she was funding her own public humiliation with my husband's pension checks. Throughout the day, I maintained my facade of helpful confusion while secretly coordinating final details with Harold, Timothy, and Detective Chen via text messages from my hidden phone. Every element of our counterstrike was confirmed and ready. The first guests arrived at 6 o'clock sharp. Crystal's parents, Robert and Diana Williams, who had always treated me with polite indifference. They brought expensive flowers and wine, clearly impressed by their daughter's apparent success in managing an elderly woman's household. "Crystal, darling, the house looks magnificent." Diana gushed, air-kissing her daughter while surveying the elegant table setting. "You've done wonders with the decor." I bit my tongue, remembering how those decorations had been purchased with my money after Crystal threw away Frank's cherished belongings. Marcus played the dutiful son, helping guests with coats and offering drinks, but I noticed his nervousness. He kept glancing at his phone and fidgeting with his tie, perhaps sensing that something felt different about this particular gathering. Sharon Williams, Crystal's older sister, arrived fashionably late with her husband, both successful professionals, who clearly admired Crystal's apparent transformation of her mother-in-law's living situation. "You've really got things organized here," Sharon observed, accepting a glass of expensive wine. "Mother was worried about how you'd handle living with Marcus's mother, but you seem to have found the perfect arrangement." If only she knew what that perfect arrangement actually entailed. The neighbors Bill and Martha Henderson arrived with cautious expressions, having witnessed enough of Crystal's treatment to feel uncomfortable, but not yet understanding the full scope of abuse. Martha squeezed my hand gently when Crystal wasn't looking, a gesture of support that strengthened my resolve. My dear friend Patricia from church brought her famous dinner rolls and a knowing look that told me she suspected tonight would be more significant than a simple dinner party. I'd been carefully preparing her for weeks, sharing selected concerns about my living situation without revealing the complete plan. Marcus's boss, Jim Morrison, came with his wife, both eager to socialize with their employee's family. Jim had no idea he was about to witness his subordinate's arrest for multiple felonies. Crystal's former co-worker, Lisa cousin Melissa, and the final couple completed the guest list of 12. Everyone was dressed nicely, expecting an elegant evening of good food and pleasant conversation. The representative from Sunset Manor Memory Care arrived precisely at 7 o'clock as planned. Dr. Angela Richardson was a polished woman in her 50s who specialized in evaluating elderly candidates for institutional placement. Crystal had coached her about my supposed symptoms of dementia and unpredictable behavior. "I'm here to observe and potentially discuss care options," Dr. Richardson whispered to Crystal during introductions. "I'll watch for the behavioral indicators you mentioned." Crystal's excitement was barely contained as she seated everyone around the expanded dining room table. She'd positioned me at the far end, in the spot typically reserved for children or elderly relatives who were expected to remain quiet during adult conversations. "Everyone, I want to thank you for joining us tonight," Crystal announced, raising her wine glass in a toast. "This is such a special opportunity for you all to see how we've created a loving, supportive home for Marcus's mother during this challenging time in her life." The irony of her words was breathtaking. Crystal was actually thanking people for witnessing her systematic abuse of an elderly woman. As I served the appetizers with deliberately shaky hands, playing up the frail elderly woman role, Crystal expected I caught Martha's concerned glance. She knew something was wrong, but couldn't quite identify what. "Sonia seems to be struggling tonight," Crystal said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Sometimes she gets confused and forgetful, especially in social situations. It's one of the challenges we're dealing with as a family." Dr. Richardson made careful notes documenting my supposed cognitive decline for her evaluation report. What none of them knew was that Timothy Jennifer Harold Peterson, Detective Chen, and Adult Protective Services caseworker Michael Torres were all positioned outside the house, coordinating through earpieces and waiting for my signal to begin the coordinated strike. During the main course, Crystal ramped up her performance. She loudly corrected my mistakes, while serving made jokes about my cooking abilities and shared fabricated stories about my confusion with medications and household tasks. "Last week she tried to put laundry detergent in the coffee maker," Crystal lied smoothly. "We're constantly worried about her safety. Sometimes she doesn't even recognize little Emma." The guests responded with sympathetic murmurs and concerned glances in my direction. Crystal's narrative was working perfectly, except that every word was being recorded by the hidden cameras I'd positioned throughout the dining room. "It must be so difficult for you both," Diana Williams said, patting Crystal's hand supportively. "You're such devoted children to care for her at home, instead of placing her somewhere." Marcus nodded solemnly, playing his role as the concerned son. "We just want what's best for Mom, even though it's challenging sometimes." Crystal had set up the perfect scenario for her planned climax. After dessert, she would create a situation that made me appear confused and agitated. Then Dr. Richardson would recommend immediate evaluation for memory care placement. But as I cleared the dinner plates with exaggerated unsteadiness, I felt my hidden phone vibrate with Harold's text message. "All units in position. Execute on your signal." Crystal stood to announce dessert service, her face glowing with satisfaction as she prepared to spring what she thought was her trap. "Before we have dessert, I want to share something with all of you," Crystal said, moving to stand behind my chair with her hands on my shoulders in a gesture that appeared protective but felt threatening. "We've been dealing with some difficult decisions about Sonia's future care needs." She was about to publicly humiliate me one final time, providing the witnesses and justification for having me declared incompetent and institutionalized. Instead, I stood up slowly, my hands no longer shaking, my voice clear and strong, for the first time in 3 years. "Actually, Crystal, I have something important to share with everyone here tonight." The room fell silent as my transformation from frail victim to determined woman shocked everyone into attention. The trap was about to be sprung, but not the way Crystal had planned. I stood slowly, feeling every eye in the room focus on me as I straightened to my full height. The trembling hands Crystal had been documenting all evening were perfectly steady as I reached into the sideboard drawer and pulled out my laptop. "I need to share something with all of you tonight," I said, my voice clear and strong. "Something that's been happening in this house for the past 3 years. Crystal's face went white. "Sonia, honey, you're confused again. Why don't you sit down and—" "I'm not confused, Crystal. In fact, I've never been more clear about anything in my life." I opened the laptop and connected it to the television screen that Crystal had installed for entertaining. The first video began playing immediately, Crystal striking me with the metal ladle just 1 week ago, her voice screaming, "Who cooks like that, you useless woman?" while Marcus turned up the television volume to ignore my cries for help. The room erupted in gasps and shocked exclamations. Patricia covered her mouth in horror. Martha grabbed her husband's arm. Crystal's parents stared at their daughter in disbelief. "This is fake!" Crystal shrieked, lunging toward the laptop. "She's manipulated the video somehow." "Actually, there are dozens more," I said calmly, clicking to the next recording, including this one from last month. The screen showed Crystal counting money she'd stolen from my purse while talking to Marcus about how pathetic I was for paying all their expenses. "The old bat thinks we're grateful," Crystal's voice said clearly. "She's so stupid cooking and cleaning like our personal servant." Marcus appeared on screen laughing at his mother's expense. "She won't live forever. This house will be ours soon enough." Jim Morrison, Marcus's boss, stared at his employee with disgust. "Marcus, is that really you talking about your mother's death like a business opportunity?" "I can explain," Marcus started, but I was already playing the next video. This recording showed Crystal coaching 2-year-old Emma to call me mean grandma and tell preschool teachers that I forgot things and acted weird. The audio was crystal clear as Crystal bribed Emma with candy to lie about my mental state. "You're destroying that child's relationship with her grandmother," Jennifer said from the back of the room. Everyone turned to see Timothy, Jennifer, and Harold Peterson standing in the doorway. "Timothy," I called out with genuine joy. "Everyone, this is Frank's nephew Timothy and his wife Jennifer. They've come to support me tonight." Crystal's sister Sharon looked between the videos and her sister's panicked expression. "Crystal, what is this? What have you been doing?" I clicked to the financial evidence Harold had prepared. Bank statements filled the screen, showing hundreds of unauthorized withdrawals, credit cards opened fraudulently, and loan applications with forged signatures. "Crystal has stolen over $80,000 from my accounts," I announced. "She refinanced my house twice without my knowledge and has been applying for government benefits using my name while claiming I'm mentally incompetent." Dr. Richardson from Sunset Manor stood abruptly. "Mrs. Williams, you told me this woman had dementia and needed immediate placement. These videos show deliberate abuse, not cognitive decline." "This is all lies!" Crystal screamed, but her voice cracked with desperation. "She's crazy. She's been acting confused and forgetting things for months." "Actually," I said, playing the next audio file, "here's a recording of you confessing to drugging my food with stolen sleeping medication." Crystal's voice filled the room. "I've been putting those pills in her dinner every night for months. She gets so drowsy and confused, everyone thinks she's losing her mind. It's perfect evidence for the commitment hearing." The room fell into stunned silence. Crystal had just been exposed as someone who was systematically poisoning an elderly woman to fake symptoms of mental illness. Diana Williams stared at her daughter in horror. "Crystal, you've been drugging this poor woman and stealing from her. How could you do such things?" Detective Sarah Chen chose that moment to enter through the front door with two uniformed officers. "Crystal Williams and Marcus Henderson, you're under arrest for elder abuse, fraud, forgery, and conspiracy." Crystal bolted toward the back door, but more officers were waiting there. Marcus sat frozen in his chair as handcuffs were placed on his wrists, his face gray with the realization that his crimes had been thoroughly documented. "You can't arrest us based on fake videos," Crystal screamed as she was restrained. "She's senile. She doesn't know what she's doing." Adult Protective Services caseworker Michael Torres stepped forward with his official identification. "Mrs. Williams, I've been investigating this case for 2 weeks. The evidence of systematic abuse is overwhelming and well documented." Harold Peterson addressed the room with quiet authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you've witnessed tonight represents one of the most comprehensive elder abuse cases in Colorado legal history. Mrs. Henderson has been systematically victimized by her own family members who plan to steal her assets and have her illegally committed to an institution. I distributed the USB drives I'd prepared for each guest containing complete evidence of Crystal and Marcus's crimes. I want everyone to see the full scope of what's been happening. This wasn't just occasional meanness. It was calculated criminal behavior designed to destroy my life and steal everything Frank and I worked for." Crystal's parents approached me with tears in their eyes. "Mrs. Henderson, we had no idea," Robert Williams said. "We thought Crystal was being helpful caring for you in your own home. If we'd known she was hurting you—" "She told us you were becoming confused and needed supervision," Diana added. "We never imagined she was causing the problems she claimed to be solving." Sharon Williams looked devastated. "I praised her for being such a devoted daughter-in-law. I told people what a saint she was for taking care of an elderly relative. I'm so ashamed." As Crystal and Marcus were led away in handcuffs, Crystal made one last desperate attempt at manipulation. "Sonia, please. I was just trying to help. You were getting confused and I was protecting you." I looked directly at her, my voice calm but firm. "Crystal, the only thing I was confused about was why I allowed you to treat me so badly for so long. That confusion is completely gone now." The FBI financial crimes investigators arrived as the local arrests were being completed. Agent Patricia Williams explained that Crystal was wanted in connection with similar elder abuse schemes in 3 other states, making this a federal case. Mrs. Henderson's documentation and evidence gathering has helped us build cases against an entire network of people who target elderly women through marriage and family relationships, Agent Williams said. Your courage in fighting back will protect other potential victims. As the evening wound down and guests began leaving, each person approached me individually to express their shock support and apologies for not recognizing the abuse sooner. Martha Henderson hugged me tightly. I knew something was wrong, but I never imagined it was this bad. You're the strongest woman I've ever known for surviving this and fighting back. Patricia from church was crying. I should have pushed harder when you missed so many activities. I should have known you wouldn't just abandon your commitments without reason. Jim Morrison looked shaken. I'm firing Marcus immediately. No one with this kind of character can represent our company. I'm also reviewing our policies about recognizing signs of domestic abuse among employees' families. Timothy and Jennifer stayed after everyone else left, helping me process the emotional aftermath of exposing 3 years of systematic abuse. Uncle Frank would be so proud of you, Timothy said. You didn't just save yourself, you've protected other people from becoming victims of the same crimes. Jennifer, with her social work background, helped me understand the psychological aspects of what I'd endured. What Crystal did was textbook psychological manipulation designed to break down your sense of reality and self-worth. The fact that you recognized it and fought back shows incredible strength. As I locked the door that night, I realized I was alone in my own home for the first time in 3 years. No one would criticize my cooking, steal my money, or make me feel worthless in the house where Frank and I had built our life together. Justice had been served, but more importantly, I had reclaimed my dignity, my home, and my future. The nightmare was over. The healing could finally begin. 6 months later, I stood in the same kitchen where Crystal had struck me with the ladle, but everything had changed. Sunlight streamed through windows I'd uncovered after taking down Crystal's heavy curtains. Fresh flowers from my restored garden filled a vase on the counter. The house felt like home again. Crystal received 8 years in federal prison for elder abuse, fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy charges. The FBI had connected her to a sophisticated network that targeted elderly women across 4 states, with total financial damages exceeding $2 million. She would serve her sentence in a facility far from Colorado with no possibility of early release. Marcus was sentenced to 4 years for his role in the conspiracy, lost all parental rights to Emma, and was ordered to pay full restitution for stolen funds. His former employer, Jim Morrison, had fired him immediately and implemented company-wide training about recognizing signs of domestic abuse among employees' families. The house ownership was fully restored to me through legal proceedings. Every stolen dollar was recovered with penalties, leaving my finances healthier than they'd been in years. Crystal's expensive decorations were sold at auction, with proceeds going to an elder abuse prevention fund Harold established in Frank's memory. Most importantly, little Emma was thriving in her new home with Timothy and Jennifer in California. The adoption process had been expedited due to the documented abuse and neglect she'd experienced with Crystal. Weekly video calls showed a confident, happy child who called me Grandma Sonia with genuine affection. "Look what I made in art class," Emma said during our Sunday call, holding up a crayon drawing of our family. Timothy, Jennifer, and I were stick figures holding hands under a bright yellow sun. "My teacher says I can send it to you. I'll hang it on my refrigerator right next to your other pictures," I promised. The child who'd been taught to call me mean grandma now created artwork celebrating our relationship. Timothy visited Denver monthly, sometimes bringing Emma for extended weekends. The house filled with laughter again as a happy child played in rooms that had witnessed too much cruelty. Frank would have loved seeing his great niece discover the joy of baking cookies in his mother's kitchen. Aunt Sonia Emma asks about you constantly, Timothy told me during one visit. She remembers feeling safe with you even when everything else in her life was chaotic. You protected her as much as you protected yourself. My social life had not only returned, but expanded beyond what I'd enjoyed before the abuse began. Patricia and I traveled together visiting national parks and historical sites I'd always wanted to see. The book club welcomed me back enthusiastically, and I'd become their most active member. The church had asked me to start a support group for abuse survivors meeting weekly in the fellowship hall. 8 women and 2 men attended regularly, sharing stories and healing together. Many had experienced similar isolation and financial exploitation from family members they'd trusted. "What Sonia shows us," said Margaret, a 72-year-old whose son had stolen her retirement savings, "is that it's never too late to fight back. Age doesn't make us helpless unless we choose to be." The elder abuse prevention advocacy had become my passion. I spoke at conferences, training sessions, and community events about recognizing warning signs and resources for victims. The memoir I'd written about my experience became a bestseller, with proceeds funding scholarships for legal aid programs. "Courage doesn't mean you're not scared," I told an audience of social workers in Phoenix. "It means you act despite the fear, because standing up for yourself protects others who might face the same treatment." Detective Chen invited me to join the police department's elder abuse task force as a civilian consultant. My experience helped them recognize patterns of systematic exploitation that might otherwise be dismissed as family disputes. "Mrs. Henderson's case has become our training model," Detective Chen explained to new task force members. "It shows how documentation, legal preparation, and strategic planning can turn a victim into a prosecutor's star witness." Harold Peterson had expanded his legal practice to focus primarily on elder rights cases inspired by the comprehensive nature of my documentation and the successful prosecution it enabled. His office now employed 2 additional attorneys specializing in financial abuse recovery. "Sonia's case taught me that elderly clients aren't just seeking legal services," Harold said. "They're fighting for dignity, independence, and the right to live safely in their own homes. That's worth fighting for with everything we've got." Martha Henderson had become my closest friend and travel companion. We'd taken cruises to Alaska and the Mediterranean, visited art museums in major cities, and explored small towns throughout the Rockies. The friendship that began with concerned neighborly observation had blossomed into a sisterhood of mutual support. "I'll never forgive myself for not acting sooner when I saw how Crystal treated you," Martha said during one of our morning walks through the neighborhood. "You acted when it mattered most," I reassured her. "Your support gave me courage to take the first steps toward getting help." 5 years after that terrible dinner party, I hosted Thanksgiving dinner for my chosen family of supporters. Timothy, Jennifer, and Emma flew in from California. Patricia brought her famous dinner rolls. Martha and Bill provided desserts. Harold and Linda joined us along with Detective Chen and her family. The dining room table that had witnessed Crystal's cruelest performance now overflowed with gratitude, laughter, and genuine affection. Emma, now 7 years old, sat in the place of honor at my right hand, chattering about school and friends while carefully helping serve the turkey. "Grandma Sonia, tell everyone how you made the bad lady go away," Emma requested as she did every visit. "I told the truth about what was happening," I said simply, "and I asked good people to help me. Sometimes that's all it takes." As evening fell and our guests prepared to leave, I walked through the house Frank and I had called home for 35 years. Every room held memories of joy reclaimed and dignity restored. The basement apartment where I'd hidden during my darkest days was now a bright office where I wrote articles and prepared speaking presentations. Liberty. My rescue cat followed me through the tour, purring contentedly in a home where she'd never known anything but kindness. I'd adopted her from a shelter that specifically placed animals with senior citizens, completing the circle of rescue and renewed purpose. The garden where Frank's memorial bench sat, surrounded by flowers, had become a place of peace and reflection. I spent mornings there with coffee and grateful prayers, watching sunrise illuminate the mountains that had witnessed my transformation from victim to survivor to advocate. Crystal's appeals had been exhausted, her sentences affirmed by higher courts. Marcus remained in prison, his requests for early release denied. Neither would ever again have the power to hurt me or anyone else I could protect through education and advocacy. But my story wasn't about revenge, despite the satisfaction I'd felt watching them face justice. It was about rediscovering self-worth, that no one could steal, setting boundaries that protected both body and spirit, and using painful experience to prevent others' suffering. The most profound lesson I'd learned was that family honor comes from protecting vulnerable members, not from silently enduring abuse to maintain false peace. Age brings wisdom that should be celebrated and respected, not exploited for personal gain. True strength isn't measured by how much pain you can endure, but by your willingness to say enough when boundaries are crossed. Self-respect demands action when dignity is attacked, and speaking truth creates ripples of positive change that protect future generations from similar harm. As I prepared for bed in the master bedroom I'd reclaimed, I thought about Frank and the life we'd built together in this house. He would be proud of the woman I'd become through surviving the worst betrayal imaginable and transforming that pain into purpose. The nightmare that began with a ladle striking my head had ended with a courtroom victory that protected other elderly women from the same systematic exploitation. The victim phase of my life was permanently closed. The healing phase had evolved into a mission phase that gave everyday meaning and direction. I was 70 years old, financially secure, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about my welfare, and more confident in my own strength than I'd ever been in my life. The house was mine. The future was bright, and justice had been served completely. Sometimes the best revenge is living well, but in my case, the best revenge was making sure the criminals faced full consequences for their choices while building a life more fulfilling than anything they'd tried to destroy. What experiences have you had with setting boundaries in difficult family situations? Your stories of standing up for yourself or someone you love could inspire others who are facing similar challenges. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button. If this story resonated with you, subscribe to hear more stories of courage and justice, and share this with anyone who might need to know that it's never too late to reclaim your power and dignity. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that your worth is never determined by how others treat you, but by how you choose to treat yourself. May you find the courage to speak your truth and the wisdom to know you deserve better than anyone who makes you feel small.